The Astounding Wolfman, the werewolf who uses powers for good. The concept of the werewolf is something that Hollywood has embraced, making shows upon shows and movies upon movies featuring these half-man, half-beast creatures. Today, we bring you to a comic book character of the same vein, quite aptly named Wolfman. You would think that being a werewolf would automatically make one an agent of destruction, but Wolfman proves that is not always the case. Robert Kirkman's character Wolfman first appeared in The Astounding Wolfman #1 in 2007 and was launched by Image Comics. Gary Hampton, a millionaire CEO who becomes a lycanthrope after being attacked by a werewolf during a family holiday, stars in the series. Hampton learns to use his newfound werewolf talents for goodness. The series ended in 2010 and was notable for juxtaposing lycanthropy's terrible, dark curse with Hampton's desire to become a classic, morally upright superhero. Let us jump right in, and don't worry, he is nothing like Jacob from Twilight. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The first comic book appearance and origins explored. The entire series, titled The Astounding Wolfman, revolves around the lycanthropic protagonist. The first issue opens with the scene of a terrible accident where Gary Hampton, a millionaire CEO, was shown lying in a pool of his own blood, chest and arms ripped to shreds by what was believed to be a bear attack while he was out camping with his family in the Willow Creek camping ground in Montana. It was truly an unfortunate incident to happen to a man who had a loving wife and daughter, a successful business, and was at the peak of his life. He was swiftly carried away to the hospital. However, most doctors believed that he would not pull through because of how terrible the injuries were. But unfortunately, Gary went into a coma for a month, which was extremely tough on his wife and daughter. However, one fine day, he opened his eyes as his wife was smoking in his hospital room, and voila, he was up. The doctors and nurses rushed to check on him, as most of them, if not all, believed that it was an absolute miracle that he was even alive in the first place, let alone awake. After conducting a variety of tests, they were satisfied and declared him to be out of danger and on his road to recovery. However, that night we see a very strange thing happen. It was coincidentally full moon night, and in this hospital room, Gary transformed into a gigantic werewolf and jumped out of the window into the streets. We see him run around on top of buildings, past roads, and even manages to scare a poor old man who was just minding his own business. He comes back to his room as the night ends. Surprisingly, all his wounds have completely healed and he needed no surgery anymore. Not even the skin grafts that were scheduled for his torso and arms that had been ripped to shreds during the attack. The doctors were all surprised once again, but had no choice other than to let him go. Gary goes back to his mansion and we see a whole host of new troubles plaguing him. His 1-month-long absence from his company had caused the stocks to plummet since no one had thought that he would be able to pull through from a coma. However, even though his work was a massive headache for him, what we see is that he has an extremely loving and supportive family and he is an excellent father to his young daughter. He goes to sleep that night beside his wife but wakes up to the moon as he changes into his beast form and runs into the compound of his mansion. He finds some rabbits and kills and eats them in his frenzy before returning to bed. The incident is flagged by his estate manager and butler, but he and his wife watch video footage of him eating rabbits in his werewolf form. She suddenly realizes that her husband is the werewolf as they notice that both the beast and Gary were wearing the same pair of ripped shorts. As this realization dawned upon them, a man named Zachariah approached him and asked to be his mentor. He promises Gary that he would help him learn and control his newfound powers because he was also an agent of the night, a vampire, and would be able to guide him. Gary accepted his proposal and the two began training together because Gary wanted to be a superhero and use his powers for good. They began training every night, and Zachariah even introduces Gary to a man named Art who creates a costume for him and a gadget that allows him to store the light and energy of the moon in his costume so that he would not immediately transform back into a man if he stayed out for a little too long and the sun rose. Gary gained the ability to control his powers and was also dubbed Wolfman by the media and the people who saw his doing good deeds and helping save people in the city. Thus originated this lycanthropic hero. However, with a power that is as unpredictable as this one, things would never be the same in Gary's life ever again. Wolfman's extensive story arc in brief. The 25-issue series perfectly captures the turmoil of being a superhero with such a power as Gary has to navigate his way through it all. After he completely embraced the life of a superhero, he was able to assist the Actioneers, a team of superheroes, in their fight against the Slime Beast. He hurried away since he still felt rather inexperienced to meet any true heroes. He decided to stay home the next night, and his change was activated when he was getting romantic with his wife. Unable to resist it, he abandoned his home, walked into town, and murdered Sergeant Superior, one of the superheroes he had previously assisted. This incident causes him to hate himself, and he isolates himself from everyone. When Zachariah arrives to meet him 2 weeks later, Gary charges at him in his wolf form. It's discovered that Zach hasn't met Gary in 2 weeks since Gary assassinated Sergeant Superior. Zach reveals everything and informs Gary that it was all supposed to happen this way and that there was nothing to worry about. Gary would transform into a savage werewolf on the first day of every full moon, Zach reveals, holding only a small part of his consciousness inside that will safeguard anybody intimately connected to him. For those not as intimate, well, you better hope you didn't run into the Wolfman. Gary apologizes and states that he will resume patrolling soon. When Gary finally returns home, he is a little uneasy and assures his wife that he still loves her and that everything will be fine. The next day, Gary returns to patrolling and we witness Zachariah's unusual automobile in action. It manages to launch Gary into the air in order to apprehend Thrillkill, a villain who kidnapped a woman. Thrillkill tries to negotiate with Gary by discarding the girl and compelling Gary to choose between beating him and rescuing the girl as Gary pursues him across the rooftops. When Gary lunges at him, they both fall off the roof, fight in midair, and Gary saves the girl before they reach the ground. When they arrive, the police attempt to arrest Gary, but the woman protects him as he exits. When Gary returns, he discovers the car has been destroyed and Zach has been kidnapped by a bunch of werewolves who refer to Gary as Elder Brood. He fights them and they flee in terror. When Gary reunites with Zach, he has a slew of questions for him, which Zach refuses to answer. Quite fishy behavior from Zach. Gary informs his wife the next day that he has been sacked from his job. Remember how he was a millionaire CEO and that some of their housekeeping and comforts would have to be reduced. Gary's butler, Dunford, enters and informs that there are guys at the door attempting to evict Gary. Gary apologizes to his wife and admits that everything was falling apart. The family then relocates to Gary's hidden underground bunker after vacating their home. After moving, he believed it was time to demonstrate his new form to his daughter. She was taken aback as he wolfed out and showed her his massive and scary werewolf form, causing her to go into shock. Gary and Zach went out that night after Chloe had calmed down. However, the previously encountered werewolf group attacked him. Gary was so forceful in fighting them that he accidentally murdered one. He then tried explaining himself to the others, but all they cared about was how powerful he was and could become. They began to inform Gary of all of Zach's secrets, as well as the fact that Gary was on the wrong side of the conflict. Gary is then attacked by the main wolf, who demands that he reveals Zach's whereabouts. This should have been a massive red flag about his relationship with Zach, but like many others who choose to ignore red flags, so did he. Gary then gets beaten to a pulp by the other werewolves and Zach finally shows up to protect him. Zach and the lead wolf start arguing as they all change back into their human forms, and it is revealed that Zach used to be their friend until his bloodlust drove him to murder a young female werewolf. Gary inquires if the claim is accurate, which Zach admits but tries to justify himself. Red flag number 2. Gary is also told by the werewolf group that Zach only trained him to be a bodyguard for him. Gary screams at Zach and then snaps, slicing off Zach's head with his claws, apparently killing him. Jacobson, the lead wolf, pays tribute to him, claiming that he has found a powerful ally in Gary. However, Zach reappears in a misted state after the werewolf gang has left. The death was a ruse, and despite what he's done, Gary still trusts in Zach and doesn't believe he needs to prove himself. Zach expresses his gratitude for their friendship. The two of them part ways, promising to meet the next night. Finally, Zachariah explains why Jacobson dubbed him Elder Brood. Gary discovers that he was not only attacked by a werewolf, but also by an elder werewolf. Elder werewolves are the werewolves that are the oldest of the lot and therefore the strongest. They don't just attack anyone, Zachariah explains. They pick and select who they attack. Gary and Zachariah agreed to look for the man who turned him in Gary's search for explanations. The next night, Chloe enters a chamber where her father has been imprisoned so that he cannot harm his family or anyone else. Rebecca informs Chloe that her father will have to do this every month, but the situation will improve. Will things ever get better? What if he keeps getting worse? Chloe wonders. Things keep getting worse for Gary, unfortunately. We learn that his daughter Chloe is getting bullied at school and being called homeless girl ever since Gary lost his job and they were forced to shift into the secret hideout, causing her to develop an intense hatred for her father. Due to all of these frustrations, his werewolf form gets more and more volatile and he even gets called a murderer while out on the streets. His former adversaries and the people he had accidentally killed keep coming back to haunt him, such as the return of Sergeant Superior whom he had killed long ago, who came back in the form of a vampire. This creates a chasm between Zek and Gary tells him to never come into his life ever again. By this time, he is dejected and a lonely man and begins to wish that he had never gotten these powers in the first place, as he was not even able to do any good with so much power at his disposal. His relationship with Zek comes to a lurching end when Zek kills his wife and drinks her blood. After having lost everything, he loses the one person who had unconditionally stood by him, and as he cradles her dead body, Chloe walks in and immediately thinks that her father had lost control and killed her mother. This incident prompts Gary to go into hiding. Zek continues to do his evil deeds and recruits Chloe so that he could train her and help her kill her own father. Honestly, Zek is probably the most abominable character in the entire series. Gary is eventually found and taken to prison for the murder of his own wife. The others plot to kill him, and Chloe even manages to stab her father in the chest with a sword, but he escapes, taking Chloe with him to safety. Gary's journey as a werewolf has been laced with hardships at every turn, and the comic, with its dark and gritty feel, does a tragically beautiful job of portraying it all. His powers and gadgets explained. We see a whole slew of powers and abilities on show from the moment Gary wakes up from his coma. The first notable power is his accelerated healing factor, which allows him to recover from a fatal wound and leaves him with not a single scar on his body. He gains superhuman senses, strength, speed, agility, and durability, which are all most pronounced while he is in this wolf form. His powers are very much like that of a traditional wolf. However, if there is one thing we know about these creatures of the night, it is that they have an extremely tough time controlling their powers, especially when they first receive them. It was no surprise that he was out of control and did not know how to rein in his powers. However, after only a few weeks of training, he had gained control over his powers and could even change into a werewolf at will. However, because he is also a superhero, he had a couple of gadgets at his disposal which helped him streamline his powers and skills and channel them much more efficiently. His suit is his most integral gadget. It is a black spandex outfit under a bulletproof chest piece with a Thundercat-esque wolf emblem, 2 big gauntlets with lunar energy absorbing discs for prolonged transformation beyond nighttime, and some type of armored boots with the tips cut off for the use of the claws on his feet. It appears that a secret base is being set up for Gary's use in the first couple of issues. To build it, Zechariah has mind-controlled construction workers, but he paid them well and they thought they were building a mall to conceal Gary's identity. The base was first revealed in issue 3, but this time in greater depth. It appears to be quite big, and the family finally moves into this base when Gary gets sacked from his job. Lastly, his car is another of his gadgets, very James Bond-esque. However, the person who drives this car is primarily Zechariah. Although a launch pad installed in the rear hood of the car is specifically used to launch the Wolfman into rooftops and other high unreachable areas. The car is a fog grayish color with a Wolfman emblem on the front. The astounding Wolfman contrasts the terrible curse with Gary's ambition to be a classic hero, using typical horror tropes from werewolf myths. During the full moon, his curse drives him to lose control, putting a burden on his career, family, and money. When he helps people, he wears a uniform, but his hideous look often causes people to dread and distrust him. He is chased down after his wife is murdered by an enemy, because no one believes his word despite his heroic efforts. His daughter turns against him and along with Zechariah storms the prison in an attempt to assassinate him after he had suffered multiple indignities and abuses while wrongfully indicted there for the murder of his wife. He does, however, beat the vampire and reunite with his daughter after a tense meeting with her. After this, Wolfman's name is cleared, and now that he has proven himself, he may finally live the heroic life he has always desired. All's well that ends well, I guess. What do you think about the Wolfman? Let us know in the comment section below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.